Yo, what's going on, boys? Welcome back to the Juicecast. Now, in this video, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be reacting to the press conference for UFC 328. This is something that I never do on this channel. I always talk about this in a lot of live streams that press conferences are not even worth watching at this point. They more or less suck. The fighters themselves don't really add too much context. The questions more or less suck. Why are you going to win? Why are you going to do this? It's just questions that don't really matter. Press conferences are not even worth watching at this point. Maybe you'll get a couple here and there where some guys have beef, and it could be somewhat interesting, I guess, with Diego Lopez versus Yair Rodriguez. But outside of those, like, 1 every 10 sort of fight card chances, the press conferences suck, more or less. But this press conference, UFC 328, mostly Khamzat and Sean Strickland, really brought it. This press conference was huge. It was very, very entertaining to watch, to say the least. I'm incredibly more excited about this fight now than I was just a couple of hours ago. And even a couple hours ago, I was still really excited for the fight. I knew Strickland and Khamzat had beef, but this definitely adds a lot to this fight. It makes the fight feel bigger. The press conference itself was finally incredibly entertaining, and it just gets me hype as a UFC fan. This is what we've been clamoring for when we want to see great press conferences. This is exactly it. And finally, we got some sort of a glimmer of what a great press conference could be. Now, I know this is recency bias, of course, but I did get the vibes of Conor versus Khabib. I really did. Now, I know that may sound ridiculous. I know the fight itself is not going to be as big as Conor versus Khabib was, but these guys have legitimate animosity towards each other, to say the least. I don't think these guys are too big of a fan of each other. I think that's safe to say. And yes, there have been guys in the past that have had beef, but it's not to this level. This is honestly feels like a different level between both these guys. And when you look at the actual numbers, I think it does support that. As there at a certain point, concurrently, there was over 200,000 people watching this press conference. And to give you some context, the Conor one versus Khabib was 500,000, obviously a lot more, but that was like the biggest fight of all time. But usually, press conferences don't get nearly as much or as many people watching. Maybe it's 30,000 or 40,000, maybe if you get lucky, probably even less than that traditionally, to be honest. This is a huge press conference. I think everybody was anticipating that, and that's exactly what we got. Super fun. These guys are just going back and forth constantly between each other. Very, very entertaining. Very, very fun to watch. And it's just something that, as I said before, we've been clamoring for as UFC fans. And this is the type of thing that gets us very excited. I'm very excited, if you couldn't tell, about this press conference. Now, in terms of the fight itself, honestly, I have the same opinion. You guys probably know this. I just talked about this actually on today's episode of the Juicecast that I just posted. I think Khamzat's going to win, but it's going to go one in two directions. It's either going to be Khamzat finds a finish early, or Strickland finds a finish late, or decisions Khamzat Chimaev. I think it's probably going to be one of those two scenarios. Is it possible that Khamzat DDPs Strickland and essentially finds a takedown and holds him down for 5 rounds? Maybe, but honestly, I don't think so. I think with the level of beef both these guys have, they're both going to be trying to go for the finish, and something has to give. One of these guys are probably going to find the finish. Maybe it'll be a decision victory for Strickland late, I guess. But I do think we're going to see one of those two scenarios, is really what I'm trying to say. So definitely very excited for this. It was kind of hilarious, though, that they even had the co-main event fighters there. Because if you remember, going into this, they did announce that it was only going to be the main event and co-main event fighters. But it was kind of funny even having the co-main event fighters there. They were just there to be there. I think the only purpose or the only reason for why they were there is to, create some space between Khamzat and Strickland. But outside of that, they barely got asked any questions. I believe Tyra got asked 1 or 2 questions, and Van the same 1 or 2 questions. Tyra looked incredibly uncomfortable that these guys were beefing as much as they actually were. Honestly, very funny to watch. But in general, it was just a very funny, very entertaining sort of press conference. And as I said, this is really what the UFC needed for quite some time. This year has been terrible. You guys are probably tired of me even talking about this. And honestly, I'm tired about it as well. This year sucks. We get it. But this is the type of thing that gets us excited for these cards. And I'm very excited to see how the press conference played out. Definitely will be tuning in tomorrow for the ceremonial weigh-ins. That should be very interesting. I'm sure they're not going to let these guys face off during the ceremonials, but nonetheless, there's going to be some entertainment value from that for sure, to say the least. And one last thing that I did want to mention about this press conference is they actually did try to square these two guys off at the very end, but Khamzat Chimaev didn't really allow that to happen. He ended up kicking Sean Strickland in the leg. Now, I know a lot of people will dismiss this and say, whatever, who cares? It doesn't matter. But if we're being honest, it's kind of like a bitch move from Khamzat Chimaev to do that. And also on top of that, there is a possibility, or there was a possibility. I don't think anything came of that. I think Strickland's fine, but there was a possibility that he could have injured Sean Strickland, and then all of a sudden the fight could have got called off. I get it. It was a kick to the leg. Probably nothing was going to happen in that situation, but maybe he could have hyperextended his knee or something. Who knows what could have happened? And I guess really my perspective is, if you have a fight that's this big and you have beef, this significant of beef, I guess, if you're Khamzat Chimaev with Sean Strickland, why would you even put yourself in this situation where the fight could possibly get called off? Now, I know a lot of you guys are probably watching this and saying, oh, you're being ridiculous. Obviously, the fight was never going to be called off. It just adds to the excitement. And honestly, you may be right, but this is kind of the same thing that a lot of fans got upset with Arman Tsarukyan for doing, where Arman ended up headbutting Dan Hooker, and that fight easily could have been called off. Now, I guess I get it. A headbutt is a lot worse than a kick to the leg. But nonetheless, these sort of shenanigans, I just feel like are bitch moves, if I'm going to be honest. And it's just something that I don't really like seeing. But thankfully, I think Sean Strickland's fine. I don't think he's injured or anything like that. I think the fight should go ahead as scheduled. And this is definitely going to be an incredibly, incredibly fun fight. When these guys walk out, when they're doing the announcements for this fight, obviously there's going to be a ton of security. I'm going to be super hype. This is just one of those fights that feel really big. Even if the majority of the fan base thinks Khamzat's going to win, and a lot of people side with him, obviously, regardless of all of that, I still think this fight is going to be incredibly entertaining and exciting going into it. And we'll see. Maybe Strickland actually pulls off the incredible. Maybe he actually finds a way to survive early and pace Khamzat late and find a finish or find a decision victory at the end of the fight. It is possible. But I guess only time will tell what does end up happening. Also, one last thing I do want to mention. I'm sure they're not going to do this. Fans were actually joking about this for a while, but a lot of fans were saying, are they going to do that face-off that they usually do for the main and co-main event fighters, where they put them in that cool room? I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about, and just face them off. I'm sure they're not going to do that, but theoretically, if they did, it's only going to add more interest and intrigue to this particular fight. I can assure you this fight card is going to do incredibly good numbers. I will say that. The rest of the card is honestly very good as well, or I'll say pretty good as well, so that definitely helps, but I think, let's be honest, I think it's pretty clear. People who are tuning into this fight card are only really there, or mostly really there, to watch Khamzat Chimaev or Sean Strickland, and that's really it. Maybe some of the hardcores want to watch the co-main event, maybe some other fights in the card like Buckley versus Brady, maybe Volkov versus Waldo, Joel Alvarez is in the card, Gauthier is in the card. There definitely are some good fighters in this card as well, but let's be honest, we're all tuning in for that main event. So incredibly excited to see what happens tomorrow night for the ceremonials. Incredibly, obviously, excited to see what happens on Saturday night with the fight itself. Should be really good press conference. That's what we need when we talk about press conferences. So let me know what you guys thought in the comments section. Who do you guys think, I should say, is going to win this fight? Let me know what you guys think. But until the next time, peace out, boys.